as I saw these people get off the train, Jack, they stepped off and they merged with this light.
This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. Those moments when heaven and earth collide and we see God, we see His hand. We see He's right here, right now, communicating with us, telling us He loves us, calling us into relationship. He could do that through a number of ways. Could be through a dream you had last night. Maybe there's a message there. Through a miraculous healing, an encounter with an angel, divine interventions, near-death experiences. We have two of those in this episode today. Two near-death experiences. Welcome. I'm your host, Trapper Jack. Question is, did you hear what God just said? What? Did He say something? Yeah. What did He say? What did He say? What did He say? Did you hear what God just said? Isn't that the struggle? Isn't that the daily struggle of if you're praying and looking for an answer to something, it's like, how come you're not answering me? I'm asking, I'm not hearing from Him. How is it everybody else hears from Him? I'm not hearing from Him. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? Where are you? And when we're not feeling that answer, that we can feel so isolated, so locked out, so alone. Did you hear what God just said? Because He has an infinite number of ways He can communicate with us. And like I said, it could be a dream. There's a number of different ways He can communicate. I don't think the first thing Noah heard from God was, go build a big boat. I think he didn't. Don't you figure he started with dinghies and worked his way up? I don't think that was the first communication. Perhaps the first thing Moses saw was not the burning bush. Sometimes you kind of work up to that. Our antenna have to be out all the time. Every day, all the time, looking for, was that important? What just happened? As an example, there was a Facebook post from Gina, a listener, and she was talking about how she's really been struggling, her and her son. Her son's 26, 27 years old now. He has a college degree. He's got a master's. He's trying to find work in his field, and he can't find it. When you can't find work, you also have insurance problems at that age, and it's just really been a struggle, and a financial struggle, and of course an emotional struggle, and just wanting to get a career started. It's difficult, right? It's difficult. So Gina was listening to the episode. I think it was the Ridiculous Faith episode. I think that was the one towards the end. And I'm telling the story of the rich guy who sees a penny on the sidewalk and he picks it up and he smiles. And it's like, what's that all about? That's his burning bush, that penny. He explained how when he sees a penny and he picks it up and he puts it in his pocket, he says to him, that's God starting a conversation, because right there on the penny it says, in God we trust. And he says to himself, Am I trusting right now? Am I trusting God in my personal life, my professional life, my spiritual life? That's his burning bush. So he kind of checks in, right? So Gina's here at the moment I start that story, at the moment I begin that story on that episode, Gina was in her laundry room and she's got a broom out. She's sweeping out from under the washer and under the dryer. And out from under the dryer comes flying, guess what? A penny. At the moment I bring up the penny story, a penny comes flying out from under the dryer. And she just stops and, what? God speaking so small, so tiny and so large. She said that was huge for her. It's small, but it was huge for her, reminding her to trust in God. She and her son need to trust in God. It was a huge moment for Gina. My wife Beth just found a penny a few days ago. I was sitting in a parking lot waiting for her. She was kind of running across the street to get something at a store, and she's coming back, and she said, I found a penny. Well, where was the penny? It was like in the middle of the road. And she grabs the penny, reminding her and me to trust in God in all things. And I needed to hear it right then. I was struggling. I have a speaker page if somebody wants to bring me in to talk to their group, conference, whatever it is, right? My speaker page is trapperjackspeaks.com. And I've been battling, trying to hear the message of what the theme is. What is my theme, if you will? Why should someone bring me in? Yeah, I talk about the miracles and the touched by heaven moments, but what's at the core of all of it? What's at the core of all of it? I've just been struggling, and I do believe we finally found it. And at the core, and right there, you should still find, I may change it somewhat, I'm not sure. Did you hear what God just said? This is what I speak about. Ultimately, that God speaks to us in so many, an infinite number of miraculous ways. All of these moments, these divine interventions, prophetic dreams, miraculous healings, on and on and on. This is God speaking to us. We all have burning bushes. We keep looking for maybe the real loud, attention, please, this is God. And he doesn't quite do it that way. He can do it in a penny. He can do it. He can do it by listening to a podcast. He can talk to us through a podcast. He can talk to us through an earworm. You know, those songs just keep playing in your head. You can't figure out why. Then you spiritualize the lyrics and go, oh. He can do it through a song you hear on the radio. He can do it in an infinite number of ways that he can be speaking to us. And last week we were talking about calling AAA. Spiritually, the Almighty always arrives. There's your AAA. The Almighty always arrives when we pray, when we connect with God, when we are open, antenna out, right? And Louise Darcy down in Australia, remember she had the story of her aunt, the nun, who locked herself out of her car, and she calls their version of AAA. And before they arrive, you know, she's throwing out prayers too, going, I just wish I had a little wire I could, fish down the window, down the door to unlock this car. And at that moment, God gave her answer. Talk about AAA arriving as the laundry truck drives by and a clothes hanger falls off the truck. I mean, what? And yesterday, Beth and I had to call AAA. Only this time it was the American Automobile Association because we had a blowout. We were coming back from going to our niece's wedding, pulling off the highway, off the highway onto the off-ramp, and hit something, ran over something, and just boom, and we were suddenly on a rim, left front tire, right? And it's kind of a dangerous spot with traffic coming off on the off-ramp, and that off-ramp became an on-ramp onto another highway, and it's kind of a dicey place, but and the berm was wide, so we had some room as cars were zipping by on the right-hand side, and we rolled to a stop. We were okay, safe and sound. At that moment, we had been listening to, on YouTube, a rosary. And we were down to about the last 3 Hail Marys before that rosary was over. So as soon as we came to a stop, I said, thank you, Mary. Thank you for the protection of the rosary. Thank you, God. When the rosary was done, Beth called AAA. In under 30 minutes, we had a tow truck there. And in another 20, 25 minutes, maybe the tow truck driver had the wheel off, tire off, and replaced it with the spare out of the back, and we were ready to go and off and run. In under an hour, it was all done. It was amazing. Oh, but the best part was the driver's name. The guy who came to the rescue to help us, his name? Angel. You can't make this stuff up. His name was Angel. So an angel to the rescue. Now then, what did God just say? Did you hear what God just said in our situation? I'm with you. Even in this, what is considered a negative moment, I am with you. And I just reminded you of that. I sent you an angel. Just God saying hi. I am with you. In what is considered a bad thing, right? A blowout. He sent this blessing. Well, in our near-death experiences today, near death is considered negative, right? You don't want to die. Everyone wants to get to heaven, just don't want to die to get there, right? All that, right? We have 2 near-death experiences. So in one case, we have Karen Seeberg in a car, 4 people in the car. She took the worst of it. Everyone else got out okay, but she took the worst of it in her car incident. I'll tell you about that in a moment here. And we have Emily Rodavich. In her case, when as a teenager, she was going through something, a health issue where she almost died. And in that negative, in this very painful moment for Emily, there was this beautiful blessing. Again, this beautiful blessing of being taken right to heaven. This glorious moment she will never forget. And again, God saying, you're not alone. I'm with you right here, right now. So let's begin our 2 near-death experiences, starting with Karen Seeberg, who was once in the film industry.
So I was a casting director for an independent film by a French film production company. And, the production wrapped. And 4 of us had flights to catch back to LA. All of us were very tired. The AD agreed to drive. And what happened was he fell asleep at the wheel. And when that happened, I was in the back. I was in the back seat. I was in the back of the driver. And I was already sleeping. And I remember kind of like drifting awake and feeling this, but like centrifugal force was just pulling me off to the left. And I heard a voice. It wasn't really a voice. I heard the words, "Go with it," which wasn't probably my normal way. Normally I probably would have resisted or something, but I heard the words. And so I just told myself, okay, I will. And the next thing I knew was completely surrounded by love. And I want to say like loveness. Like it was just permeating purity, bliss, and loveness. And like I could feel myself surrounded by it. I could feel the presence of many guides, though I really didn't understand, like, why don't, I didn't really ask the question, like, why are there so many guides here? It was just like the understood norm. I could understand things without language, without talking. I had an awareness that again, it was like I was someplace familiar, but I was very clear this is not where I spend my days. And at a certain point, it was like I was looking down, and I saw the backs of people kind of bent over in a huddle. And I remember thinking, oh, what are they looking at? And I moved what I thought was my vision a little closer because they were really far below. And kind of like a flower petals and the pollen in the center, I looked in the center and I saw, oh, they're looking at me. That's me. And it was kind of a very matter of fact, sense, like, oh, they're just looking at me. And I remember like saying kind of like, that's curious. Like, that's interesting. And I felt amazing. Like I felt so like the feeling I had right before the pull had been amplified, infinite fold. And I was so, so full of bliss and at the same time lucidly able to think. And I remember thinking, there's so much chaos here. But I remember seeing off in the distance, I remember saying to myself, that must be like a crushed can. Like it looked like a crushed aluminum can, really kind of tiny. And afterwards, like many, I don't even know how long afterwards, I realized that must have been the car, and that's probably why people were so horrified, because they saw the car. And then, the whole crew came 40 minutes after we had started out. And so they saw the car that we had been using all week. And, I heard a siren, and it was kind of off to the right. So I had the sense like, oh, I'm looking to the right now. And I remember seeing numbers, like big black numbers on the top of this like truck ambulance, and thinking like lucidly thinking, that is a strange place to put like, who's going to read numbers there? Like, why are they kind of confused by why the numbers were on top? And then the siren and the car were like coming closer towards the center. My being kind of merged with the sound, like the vibration of the siren. And the next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes and seeing up instead of down. And it's my sense this is when I was back in my body, and it started to really hurt. Like up until then, I had felt no pain. On the contrary, all my other senses came online. So there was this sense of having landed again in my body, and it was really painful. And there were people bent over me, like almost invasively in my space. And I heard this man's voice screaming, "It's a miracle, she's alive! It's a miracle, she's alive!" It was like totally hysterical. While it was happening, it was so like normal. It was so natural. I didn't really feel like it was out of anything. I felt almost like more in than out of something, like it was so much more real and lucid than the actual day-to-day life I live.
It's amazing how many people I've talked to who say the same thing, that's more real than what we think is real. Yeah. So, which is interesting too, when you think about that, it's
very interesting. And the language really falls short because, you're near death, but you're more alive than ever, you're unconscious, but you feel conscious.
Well, you are conscious. It's just a different kind of, it's that duality. We're spiritual beings, we're physical beings. And, all of a sudden you're leaving one of those behind. And the spiritual self obviously is extremely conscious. of the events.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to say, it did make sense, but it was like, you sensed a maker, it was so, there's a vibrancy there's an aliveness that is, it's just on a completely different scale or barometer, there's not even a word for it really, I guess.
And with you, there wasn't really a choice. I mean, some people, as you've read, there's like this point where there's this understanding, oh, I have to go back, or people are told you have to go back. In your case, you were just back. True?
It was automatic. I didn't think, oh, it's time to go back or I need to go back. But I do remember like, oh, I must be back now. Like, I remember opening my eyes and my body hurting and being like, like I'm no longer there,
Did you miss it? It's like,
oh, yeah. For sure.
I'd rather. Did you had a sense of I'd rather still be on the other side of this?
Yes, very much so. For a long, long time, I think that made it harder in a way to heal, because I think with any injury or illness, the question of your will to live comes up no matter how under the surface it is. And I think that made it a little more complicated. Like why, especially when things are difficult, it was like, why hang around? Like when there's something so majestic and divinely imbued that is feels so much more loving, I think, I don't feel that now. In fact, I really have no desire, like I want to be here now, like I feel like I came back, for reasons, even if I can't understand them. I feel a lot of conviction around that and even, joy, like I'm happy to be here. I'm so glad I made it, and could have kids and a life after.
I tend to, I do think of these experiences as gifts from God. I mean, they're obviously you were meant to experience that. Why do you think you were chosen to experience that?
It's a question no one's ever asked me. I think it's very challenging to sort of put into logic something that's mystical and whose order is beyond, like I can understand enough to understand I don't understand, I feel like it put me on a rightful path, and by rightful I mean like upright with God path, that never would have transpired in the same way without it.
Mm-hmm.
It feels important to say something about everybody matters, like every body matters, every human, like every human being is on purpose, whether they're aware of it or not, and nobody's ever alone. I think that's what I want to give voice to, that's really part of what I feel was shown to me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Karen. Karen Seeberg and her near-death experience. I would say Karen got it all, that there's more to life than this, that it's more vibrant than this, it's more real than this, that it wasn't her time yet, had not yet fulfilled her purpose. Everybody matters. What else? That we're not alone. We are never alone. Thank you, Karen, again. It was interesting when Beth and I were sitting on the berm there waiting for AAA, and the Almighty always arrives. While we were waiting for the tow truck, something else happened. Was it a touched by heaven moment? I believe it was. You know how when you're watching a YouTube video, something related comes up right afterwards, right? That's the way it's supposed to work, right? So generally speaking, after I listen to a rosary, another rosary comes up, right? Not this time. Not this time. In fact, after the last Hail Mary was prayed, and then part of the rosary is a prayer called Hail Holy Queen. So it started that and then jumped to the next video. Usually there's that little pause in between, right? Nope. Bam, right into a speech. by Billy Graham. Billy Graham? How is that related to rosary? Billy Graham rosary? Not usually. This is a touched by heaven moment. And I stopped it. I didn't listen to it then because we had other things to concern ourselves with, but the title was called, Who is Jesus?
That's the question. Jesus Christ, who are you?
That's the question. The other question is, why am I getting this? Why am I getting this talk? And I tracked it down based on the things he said. 1970, Billy Graham was giving this talk. Why am I getting this now, sitting on the side of the road?
Before time began, he existed.
One is that Jesus was God, always was, from the very beginning as the Son of God, and then later as in human form as Jesus. He was always God.
He stood and said, I am God.
Okay, what else, Billy?
But he did say, forgive 70 times 7. Count that up. 70 times 7 you forgive. My wife once said that the secret of a happy marriage is 2 good forgivers. And that's what it is.
All right, forgiveness. Huge with Jesus. From the cross, he told us all to forgive.
Forgive them. Could you forgive somebody that's putting nails in your hands and you know you didn't deserve it? But Jesus did make the blind to see. He made the deaf to hear.
All right, we're getting into the miracles, Jesus performing the miracles and healing people.
He had authority over demons. You say, Billy, do you believe in demons? I surely do. And Jesus confronted demons time after time, and he could cast them out. And people that were insane under the powers of demons would regain their sanity.
All right, he believes in a devil and demons, the fallen angels, and our battle against them, but that with Jesus, we can certainly conquer them.
And you're under satanic attack all the time, constantly. You know, I think in many ways, in some ways, it's easier not to be a Christian in this world. Because the devil may leave you alone. The moment you receive Christ as Savior, you're in for it. Unless you live on your knees and live in the scriptures and keep your guard up. The moment you receive Christ, you see all the world is going this way. You turn around and start against the tide as a Christian.
And we're certainly feeling that now. That's the culture. That's the battle against the culture. And you see this too. What was, as the Bible says, what was good is now evil. What is evil is now good. Everything's kind of on its head right now. Back in 1970, they were talking about the same thing as a Christian going against today's culture.
And then he dropped his head and said, it's finished. What did he mean? He meant your plan of salvation was finished. God can now forgive you of all your sins because Jesus had finished God's plan for your salvation.
Billy saying that there is sin, but there is redemption, and there is judgment.
And if you don't have the resurrection, you don't have any gospel. Jesus Christ is alive. This is the question that every one of you today are going to have to answer. Who is Jesus?
So what was all that about? Was it a touched by heaven moment? I think it was. And I think it wasn't just who is Jesus Christ, but who is Billy Graham? Was there ever a greater evangelist than Billy? Did anyone bring more people to Jesus Christ than Billy? I mean, he stopped me cold. I mean, I was out of the church for 15 years, and when I saw Billy Graham crusade, I watched. He touched a lot of us. And what did he talk about there? Well, that was just basic, solid Christian principles, right? Just church-going, love of God, love of Jesus principles, right? Okay. Well, not everyone's there. Not everyone's there. And God meets all of us wherever we are, right? He meets us all wherever we are. Okay. So my next guest tonight, we could go round and round on who Jesus is, who Jesus was, or whatever. But it doesn't change. It doesn't change what happened for Emily Rodavich. It doesn't change that God gave her a near-death experience. Absolutely. We are totally on board. Emily and I, let's talk about what she and I do agree on. That there is a God, that God is love, that Emily had a near-death experience, that there was a reason for that experience, and that there's one thing Emily got so early in life that many adults struggle with their entire lives. And that is that principle that Billy mentioned up front there, forgiveness. This is something Emily got very early in life. And this is something so many of us struggle with. And Emily's going to give you a how-to as a stepping stone to her near-death experience. Because Emily, early on in her life, she was raised for several years, she and her two siblings, by an aunt. And the aunt was very abusive, verbally, physically. And there was a lot of hate, a lot of anger bottled up inside Emily. And she had to deal with it. And she went to God to help her with the issue of anger and hatred and forgiveness. Can we forgive? This is a beautiful story. And this beautiful story of forgiveness and of a near-death experience. Here now is former English teacher Emily Rodavich, who is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I met my wife and married my wife, and where I got the name, Trapper Jack.
I remember now. I know where I've heard that name before. Okay.
Uh-huh.
You have a great radio voice.
Well, it's a rental because I have to turn it in at night.
Oh, my. First of all, I was not brought up in a church. And the reason was because my father's family was Russian Orthodox. My mother's family was Roman Catholic, and the two shall never meet. However, my mother had a very deep faith.
Emily's mom and dad would split up, and this is where Emily and her two siblings were put in the care of her aunt, and this is where the abuse began, and of course, a lot of anger.
And I just dropped to my knees and I started to pray. And I said, I asked God for an answer. I said, I'm so filled with hatred and I'm so miserable. Please, please tell me what I can do to get out of this. How can I change this? Please give me an answer. And I waited. And the word forgive came into my head, like it filled my head.
And you were how old at that time?
I was about probably around 9 years old.
That's a big word for 9. That's a real big word. Yeah.
I didn't know. I knew what I knew the word forgive, but I didn't know how to do it. But I knew a minister who was a wonderful community person. Everybody loved him. I walked past his church on the way home from school. This particular day, I went in, and his name was Reverend McCready. Basically, he said, you have to love, and you have to change your perception. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, have you ever looked through a peephole in a fence? And he said, you can only see through so much through that peephole. But when you get on the other side of the fence, you see the whole picture. He said, when you are upset, you're looking through a peephole. And he said, you have to be able to back up and see the whole picture. Eventually, I started to ask my dad questions about my aunt. And when I found out about her childhood, my grandmother had something like 13 kids. And from the day my aunt as soon as she was able to fend for herself, she was taking care of babies. And I learned about her life. And then I started to understand that here she was. She had no children of her own, probably because she didn't want any children. And then she had 3 of us dumped on her, and so on. So I took her some flowers, and she grabbed me and hugged me. I cry when I talk about this. We became best friends. She never had a childhood. And my friend Linda and I would go over to her house every day after school, and we would play jacks, we would play checkers, we played card games. She became our third playmate, and I loved that woman for the rest of my life.
Is that not just a great forgiveness story for a 9-year-old? Anybody, any age, but 9-year-old Emily. All right, let's move forward here to when Emily was 16 years old.
I went to a Methodist church, and I got to know the minister very well, and I riddled him with questions, and he looked at me and he said, Emily, until you have had a personal experience with God, you don't really believe in God. You only believe in the idea of God. And I knew that. That resonated with me. So when I was 18, right after that, I had the best personal experience with God that anyone could have. I had a near-death experience. Now, up until that time, I was petrified of death. So I had this near-death experience. I would go and get allergy shots. And I forget what the name of it is, anaphylaxis or something like that. I came home, I stayed in the office. They said I was fine. I came home and my body started to swell up. And I was so swollen that my skin split. I was in bed, my skin on my arms and my legs and it split open. I was having trouble breathing and everything. My tongue was swollen, and the doctor came, and there just wasn't anything that could be done. He couldn't give me an injection. They couldn't move me. He said, all we can do is pray. And I would be in and out of consciousness. And the next thing I knew, I was going through dark space, but I was on a train. I was only 18. Through this experience, there was a beautiful conductor on this train. I said, where is this train going? And I said, are these people dead? And he said, it's stopping soon. I'll come back and get you. So the train went to a stop, and I watched as all these people in dark suits and women were dressed. They walked up to the open doors of the train, and this loving conductor came back, and he loved me. I felt so safe with him and so protected. As I saw these people get off the train, Jack, they stepped off and they merged with this light. They just disappeared and merged into this magnificent, and nobody can describe the light. It's not just light, it's energy, it's music, it's light, it's everything. And they became a part of this. And I wanted to fall. I wanted to go next. And he stopped me and he said, you may look, Emily, but you may not leave. You may not enter. And I couldn't understand why, but I could see little buildings in the distance. And this whole imagery, Jack, communicated to me that we become one with the Spirit of the Almighty, of God, that God is the life energy. He's everything in everything and everywhere. Yet each of us is an individual part of that oneness. And people apparently keep their identities in some way, because I could see buildings which said to me, we become a part of a community which is separate and also a part of the one. If that makes any sense to you.
It does. That's exactly what St. Paul said. It's exactly what he said. We're all different. We're all pieces and parts of one. And obviously sharing the mind of God. When you step into him there, you're going to always be sharing the mind of God. That's what heaven is, that perfection of sharing.
Incredible love. It's just powerful.
That's what he is. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
When I came to, I was so filled with joy. Here is what is so significant about a near-death experience. It is the change that takes place in your being, in everything. I knew that I was going to get better, that what I was going through was temporary. It had a reason. It had a purpose. My fear of death was gone. The love in my heart was multiplied. My joy was multiplied. And my heart was bursting with joy. So, anyway.
It's like God wanted to make sure we knew through all these thousands of experiences that it doesn't end in the grave. It just, that there's more, that everything that we hear about and read about in Scripture and such, that it's true, that there is an afterlife. And he seems to just keep reinforcing that through these near-death experiences.
I believe that everybody goes to heaven, whether they're Christians or not. You and I are on the same mission. You are getting people to tell their stories on the air. And I agree with you that these God's miracles did not just happen in biblical times. They are current and they happen all the time. All we have to do is look closer, pay attention.
Thank you, Emily. Emily Rodavich, the name of her books actually, Mystical Interludes, one with her experiences, and the second book of readers' experiences. Mystical Interludes can be found at where?
EmilyRodavich.com.
Beautiful Touched by Heaven moment, beautiful near-death experiences by Karen Seeberg and by Emily Rodavich. And we are never alone. Thank you for not letting me be alone here just by myself. Thanks for being with me because, I get so lonely. So thank you for that. Share your story with me, would you? If you have an experience, please, please, please. I would appreciate it. Go to touchedbyheaven.net. Contact me there. And the other website to mention once again is trapperjackspeaks.com. Should you need a speaker for an upcoming event or conference, because this is how God speaks to us. And those are the stories I share. And I've got a lot of them. And it fortifies the faithful. That's what it does. And that includes you. So if I can be of assistance, get a hold of me at trapperjackspeaks.com. trapperjackspeaks.com. Thank you for that. I will see you next week. I'm Trapper Jack.